Okay, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our webinar, Trust But Verify. I'm here with a business associate and good friend of mine, Jose Barajas, who's our VP Field Engineering. Today, we're going to be talking about third-party risk. And I know it's not, you're probably thinking it's not as sexy a topic as us talking about some deep technology, but I think we're going to have a lot of fun today. And in fact, we're going to talk about some deep technology as well while we're at it. So let's jump right into it. But before I do that, just some admin remarks. We will be taking questions throughout the presentation today. There's a chat function on the application. So if you have a question, we'll be periodically looking at that, and we'll make sure to stop and ask questions where we can. But if for some reason we don't get to your question after the webinar is over, we'll definitely answer and email the responses to the questions for anything that we don't get to. The second thing is we are recording this while you're watching it live. If you have friends and family and other business associates that you think might find this of value, after the webinar is concluded, we'll be mailing out links to the live recording so that you can share it if you like. And we can also make available the PowerPoint presentation that'll be part of the webinar today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And let me make sure. So this could be a pretty fun webinar. And, you know, Jose and I have a lot of experience with third-party risk. I mean, certainly as a cybersecurity vendor, we sell our products and services to corporations all around the world. And it turns out everybody's got a third-party risk program that requires you to do stuff. And so we have, a lot of experience. And, you know, one of the things that we've noticed, particularly when we're buying products and services from other people, is that, you know, these third-party risk assessments often aren't completely filled out correctly, or maybe completely. And so, you know, one of the things that we want to talk about today is what does good look like, and what do we need to really do in order to make third-party risk more verifiable. And the reason why this is important is because the surface areas that attackers are taking advantage of continues to increase on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. The reality is the frequency and severity of breaches is going up, even though people are spending more money, time, and effort on cybersecurity than they ever have in the history of IP and the internet. And so what this really means when we think about third-party risk is that when I go to sell my technology to a partner or to a vendor, we actually have to fill out a lot of different paperwork. We certainly do security assessments. We certainly do DPAs, data processing agreements. But probably one of the most important things we do is an MSA, or Master Services Agreement. And we spend a lot of time, energy, and money to between lawyers, our lawyers and their lawyers, to make sure that the words in the MSA, in the EULA, that both parties agree to it. We spend a lot of treasure, a lot of time and energy on those agreements to make sure that they are representative of the business partnership for both parties. What's interesting to me is that the words matter significantly in a EULA or an MSA, but we don't really spend as much time on the security assessment for third-party risk or DPAs to make sure that all the words matter. And it seems like if from a business perspective, words matter for legal agreements, then why shouldn't the words matter? And in fact, what people actually do or don't do from a third-party risk perspective when it comes to cyber. And so that's going to kind of be our focus of discovery today. We expect that, again, from a cyber-centric perspective, that the frequency and severity of attacks is going to continue to grow, and that's going to make third-party risk from a cyber perspective even more important. So let's jump into it. So I think everybody on the call today is probably familiar with security questionnaires and documentation reviews, a lot of different types of reports that are being required to be provided mostly on an annual basis, things like SOC 2, as well as ISO 27001 certifications and things of this nature. And I think everyone's also most large scale organizations from a capability maturity model perspective have some sort of rubric or way that they're looking at all the data that they are collecting vis-a-vis the questionnaires and the documentation reviews in order to better quantify, even at a paper level, the risks that the organization may be taking as a function of entering into a partnership with this other entity. The reality is, even for what we're doing today, there's enhancements that we can focus on for what is largely being done around questionnaires and documentation review. And, Jose, I don't know how many questions did you answer last year alone?
Thousands, easily, easily.
Thousands, right? And so most organizations, if they haven't already, should be looking at leveraging some risk exchange like platforms. We use Drata very successfully here at AttackIQ for the last few years. There's other great products, I'm sure, on the market. We've listed a few of them here. What Drata allows us to do is each time we get a new security assessment or questionnaire from someone that we're looking to do business with, allows us, if we've answered those questions before, to rapidly be able to fill out these new questionnaires, saving loads and loads and loads of time. Now, even when we do that, we do end up with some interaction, with those security teams. People sometimes come back and ask us questions on those things that we submitted, but I have to tell you, it's not very sophisticated, and it's not very often that that happens. Usually, we see these security assessments and documentation reviews as more of a CYA endeavor for the corporation than any actual security getting done. And that's really what we want to address today is, what we're doing today is obviously based on resource allocation and everything that we have inside of our organization, what we can do. But the reality is, as we look to tomorrow and what we should be doing, there's a lot more that we can do. Okay, so let's kind of take it to the next level. So Jose, can you talk about some of the questions that people ask and maybe where they're not so comprehensive in helping people measure the security posture of an organization?
Yeah, absolutely. We definitely see a lot of those questions, and either are on our side or when we ask the questions, the answers that we get. And first and foremost, we start with some examples around access and privilege. We see a lot of vendors claiming things like we use VPN for secure access, but they always seem to stop short of explaining how that access is actually restricted. Is it actually monitored? Right? How is it functioning within the bigger picture of their security program as well? Further still, we see things on the RBAC side. They can talk about, we do definitely have role-based access controls, but they can talk about, how it's actually enforced, the auditability of that RBAC enforcement, and if things are ever off from that perspective. The second area is going to be around security controls. And, from here, favorite question or answer we see a lot is we follow industry best practices. That's a nice bucket answer, which is great. But what do you mean by that, right? Is it NIST? Is it CIS? Is it ISO, right? There's no way of doing that or understanding what they mean. So getting specific is going to be super important for these situations. And then another big question that we get is around, multi-factor being in place. But, often vendors say they're in place, but there's no clarity if it applies across the board. Is it just admin users? What's the applicability of this from that perspective? And then from a vulnerability and patch management perspective, patches are applied on a regular basis. Well, we need to understand, how do you manage it internally? What are the metrics that you're tracking? How far are they from industry standards? Those standards being, 0 day, 30 day, 90 days are kind of what we see. And getting to that detail is where we see a gap. And then finally, from a, incident response perspective, everyone has run their annual pen test. We find a lot of people just simply don't want to share that information, right? They don't want to even name who they did it. And, the whole point of this exercise is to better understand the other side. And if they're trying to be squirrely and not share that stuff, that's a problem. The other thing that we see a lot, especially what we do here, is just from a red teaming, phishing exercises, tabletop perspectives, often that's completely missing on a lot of programs. So those are the kind of things that we want to make sure are being done and make sure that they're also being actioned, right? It's a great thing to have a tabletop exercise, but if the findings of that are never applied, that's a problem. These are the kind of things that we don't just want to ask those questions and get the answer, but you understand that they're following up and doing the right things as part of this as well. Back to you, Carl.
Well, so we did a query, and turns out obviously there's a substantial number of listed third-party risk incidents that have happened over the years, some of them more public than others. What we wanted to do is just cherry pick 4 of them out of here that we think is a good representative sample of all the different ones that are going on. And certainly everyone's very familiar with like the SolarWinds one and some of the other ones like that. So we're not going to focus on MoveIt and SolarWinds from a third-party risk software perspective. We're looking more at the partnership ones, where you have a partnership with somebody else, and how should you better manage that, or could you better manage that? And so we just take a look at, and I'm not going to read all this. We'll make this available for you guys, but let's just focus on the relevance down below. So we take a look at the target breach. Obviously, I don't know if everyone remembers this, but it certainly was on the cover of Time magazine and a number of other different non-traditional media outlets. But there's an HVAC vendor, that actually did fill out a security questionnaire as part of third-party risk. But unfortunately, what they actually filled out and what they actually did didn't add up, resulting in a very, very serious incident for Target. And that's a theme across all of these that you see, is around what, understanding what access control someone had, what access control they didn't have, what they said they were able to do from a cyber defensive operational perspective, but unfortunately finding what their activities were insufficient in order to prevent the third-party risk incident from happening. And so what we're going to do later today is, as we walk through this, is show how simple testing could have been used in order to provide better situational awareness visibility into the effectiveness of these partner relationships as it pertains to third-party risk questionnaires and other things that they filled out. Okay, quick commercial break in the middle of this. If we go back up here and we look under risk-based assessments and due diligence, you see a maturity boost down there of build a risk scoring rubric with dynamic CTI, asset criticality, and control effectiveness, specific to your partners and what they say that they're doing. And I think most people know that AttackIQ is a founding research partner of the MITRE Center for Threat Informed Defense. And MITRE came up with a very simple questionnaire for organizations to be able to score themselves, or for you to be able to score your partners on how well they're doing around defensive measures, or that's basically specific to how well have they operationalized cyber-centric controls and how well do they manage those. How well do they leverage cyber threat intelligence, specific to how well they leverage it across functional within their organization, or in order to practice what we call a threat-informed defense? And then how well do they actually do testing and evaluation of themselves? And so when we take a quick look at this, I'll let you guys go to the MITRE CTID website. And by the way, this is the URLs for the website for CTID. And on the bottom right is where you can actually go look at and do a self-assessment of how well you're practicing a threat-informed defense. But to take you guys through it real quick, METID focus on cyber threat intelligence, on defense measures, and on test and evaluation. And when we take a look at METID specifically, these are the sample questions or areas that they focus on within each perspective category that's going to be measured. And again, you can go to the website and read a lot more about this. But this is the output from the self-assessment, is that organizations you can understand very, very quickly how well the organizations that you're partnering with are affecting a threat-informed defense. Now, some very interesting things have been done with this. PwC Japan actually went to all the financial services organizations and conducted across the country this evaluation to report to the government on how well they were doing as a vertical in adopting and executing a threat-informed defense. And so you can see different organizations can use this very simple thing. It takes less than 20 minutes to fill out, to get a perspective of how well certain organizations are from a capability maturity model. So just want to pull this up. as one good example that you could use to extend your third-party risk program and get a better understanding of how well that organization you're doing business with is operationalized MITRE ATT&CK and threat-informed defense. Okay, that's enough of the commercial for that. Again, if there's questions on that, let us know, and we put the link in the chat so you can go check out the MITRE CTID and all the projects, including this one. Okay, so bringing this back around, what should we do tomorrow? What if we were going to upgrade our third-party risk program, what are some things that we should be thinking to do? And a big part of this is around technical validation and continuous monitoring. And the reality is most organizations, have a lot of lawyers or lawyers available to them to help work on contracts like EULAs and MSAs and other things that they do business with contractually, but they don't have a lot of people in the procurement department or the cybersecurity IT department to help them monitor third-party risk. And so what that means is we need to really turn to automation. We need to really be able to either push things back onto the vendor that we're doing business that doesn't cause them a significant amount of work in order to provide you with data that is from an evaluation perspective, or we have to require them to do something and provide that report to us or that data to us. But the reality is there's a lot of automation out there today of different things that you can take advantage of in order to produce a scoring rubric that's probably more useful than the Excel spreadsheet that you're having them fill out. And so a good example here is around attack surface scanning, adversarial exposure validation, around threat monitoring, and leveraging tools and scores like Scorecard, BitSight, Risk Recon, and we're going to talk about how AttackIQ can help with that today. The other big thing, and I talk about this with our healthcare customers all the time, when you're contracting for a new service or buying a product or a partnership, that is the one time you have to insert, various obligations between you and that vendor that you're choosing to do business with. And so when we think about healthcare clinical engineering environments where there's a lot of OT, CAT scan machine, blood gas analyzers, things like that, many times the HIT environment is not responsible for maintaining those devices. They have third-party contracts with VPN access that come into the healthcare provider network in order to maintain remotely those particular OT systems. And the reality is while they may fill out that spreadsheet to tell you, all the different things they do from a cybersecurity perspective, when it comes to healthcare provider networks, this is about patient safety. If for some reason through third-party risk, one of those vendors that supports the CAT scan machine in the ER gets compromised and the adversary is able to take that CAT scan machine offline, it will not be available, in the case of an emergency, if critical patient care must be used to use that machine to help the doctors understand better how to treat that patient. And so, at the time of buying the third-party contract with that vendor is the time to make sure that you have the right to inspect their cyber defensive operational picture. And the reality is when most people think about that, they think it's this huge, ominous, I got to hire a red team, I have to hire a pen test team, it's going to be super intrusive for the vendor, so they're never going to agree to that. But the reality is that is not true. We're actually going to show that to you today. And so when we think about what we should be doing tomorrow, what we're saying here is that you should very specifically call out in your third-party risk program that you're going to do technical validation and you're going to do technical continuous monitoring of that validation. And the reality, though, is you're going to have different partners that will present different risk to the organization. And so you may have multiple levels of this. Good, better, best is an easy way to think about it. But wait, there's more. So as we take a look at other things you want to do specifically to ongoing monitoring and reassessment, and this is really addressing that point I made a second ago, you're going to have high risk vendors that for business purposes, you have to do business with. And so it's important to understand that, these type of programs can be layered in depending on, the risk that presents itself. And then there should also be events that trigger additional insights into that organization, whether it's M&A, they've had a breach that's been reported, or maybe you're adopting a new service or something of that nature. The other piece is around governance, reporting, and stakeholder alignment. And one of the things that we'll point out is a lot of time third-party risk after the contract's done, the deal's done, the security assessment signed, the DPA signed, that kind of just goes and lives in procurement. And the organization that is taking advantage of the service of the product, they're taking advantage of it, but the relationship doesn't live on. Meaning, maybe at renewal time, somebody reviews that, looks at it again, and we think it's important, that this becomes more of a stakeholder thing, particularly as the surface areas continue to grow with the partners that we do business with. Okay, so let's take a look here. So these are the 4 areas that we're recommending that people enhance over the existing processes and procedures that they're focused on today. We talked about it briefly, but I think what would be interesting is we'll actually show how to do some of this. But just to summarize, I think most third-party risk organizations, there's a huge over-reliance on trust of the paperwork drill and the spreadsheets that we're filling out. There's no technical validation of what anybody's reporting specific to those. We continue to see privilege creep within organizations, and one good example of that is you contract with someone for one particular feature or capability or service, but then through the course of the business, additional services and products are purchased, but not necessarily an update to the security assessment or the DPA. Old risks never die, and this is part of the benefit of having a relationship with someone is you hope it's successful. You hope you have that relationship for a very long time. And the reality is if somebody had a risk that you accepted 5 years ago, and you're still doing business with them today, it could be that risk is not desirable today. But rarely do we go back because we're so busy and actually reanalyze that. And then the last one, which is kind of near dear to our heart, is that the questionnaires don't always equal truth. I can't tell you how many times we've been in customer environments where we're evaluating the effectiveness of their deployment of EDR. And I'll just pick on Carbon Black for a second, where Carbon Black has a detect mode and a prevent mode. The CISO thought it was fully deployed, but the reality was it was only in detect mode. They never turned on prevent mode. So that means adversaries could actually run Mimikatz. Adversary could actually run a number of attacks in Carbon Black in this particular instance because a policy wouldn't actually prevent it. And they were relying solely on detection. And so those are the type of things that's important to know. Someone may say they have EDR on their questionnaire, but the reality is, how effective is it actually deployed, or is it actually deployed with a good policy? And so those are some of the things we want to talk about. So we're going to move into demo mode now. So Jose, can you talk a little bit about what we're going to demo as it related to what we just talked about?
Yeah, absolutely, Carl. So here, as you can see below, and I'll walk you through this when we get to the demo, but for each of these events that occurred, we have a variety of different test packages that we would have recommended. And by proactively testing some of these things, we might have been able to discover some issues ahead of time and gotten ahead of the problem. Starting really quick with the left here, with the target breach and HVAC, simple AV baseline could have been a great way of understanding that basic controls like antivirus are just not being managed well. Same thing with the Home Depot breach, where we have EDR baseline as well to make sure that things like credential theft, which is the way that this attack occurred, are actually blocked and being managed well as well. For this third one here, we actually recommend DORA assessment. And this is something that, for those of you that are in Europe, is a great requirement where we actually need to do threat-led penetration testing. And so that's something that we recommend as well. And then finally, with the last example, we also have threat-based assessments where we're actually showcasing across, across the different, threat actors that we have, picking some relevant ones as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and actually show you some of the things that we're talking about. So let me go ahead and do that. Take over for you, Carl. Let's take a look here. All right. So what I'm showing you first and foremost is what we call the AttackIQ Command Center. As you can see here on the top left, it's actually white labeled and branded under my company, Acme. This is your portal to provide testing capabilities to either yourself and different groups, or what we're focused on today is third-party vendors in order to assess the risk. The way you're able to distribute the testings of some of these vendors is simply by inviting them and giving them their own tenant. This gives them their own view, completely separated from everyone else. They can bring their own SSO and everything along with that. So from a security concern perspective, that's simply not there given what we've provided. And for each of these vendors, as you can see, we can have them have their own access and have specific tests that they have to run as part of that process. As part of this construct, you're also even able to develop custom test regimens. So as you can see, as part of this, we're going to provide some security baseline testing, some adversary emulations. These are things that AttackIQ's research team has developed and cataloged from the perspective of these. But we put you in a position, as you can see here, I have my Acme baseline. So we can tell all our vendors that they should run all their Acme baselines as part of this process. And then by having them run this, and I'll show you this next in a moment, we can start to get an understanding of how these vendors actually rate within a given technology and how they compare against others. When we look at something as very simple as something like AV baseline, most of my vendors are actually doing quite well. These two, however, are not. These are the kind of insights that we want to get. And let me show you how we got here by showing you the perspective that the end user company, in this case retailer, saw and how they got there from their perspective. So this is essentially the Flex product. This is the view as you invite the third-party vendor. This is going to be their portal to conduct the testing, get the results, and then you'll be able to get that context in the back end like I just showed you. And we'll come back and show you a little bit more detail here. From here, by being invited by you, they'll get access to this. They'll have an entire library of test packages they can select from. Again, starting with security baseline, with those first two examples that we saw, right? Testing their basic fundamentals of AV, EDR, or any other control like content filter, next generation firewall. As they're filling out these vendor, questionnaires on your site saying that they have it implemented, well, that's great, but let's measure how well it's actually being deployed and managed as part of this process. Continuously in our industry, we're always dealing with new threats. So a part of this catalog also enables you to have them test specific threat actors. If a threat actor is targeting you and you want to understand that your third-party vendors are able to actually mitigate or manage that threat so that it never reaches you, this is a way of you providing that access to them. And then if you recall, I also called out compliance testing for DORA. So in this case, the vendor was actually a bank. And DORA testing is here for a reason. This happened before DORA was a requirement, but testing with some of these things that we known to target financial institutions would have been a great way of getting ahead of the problem and addressing any problems that we might have had as part of that there. Now, in order to run this, it's very simple. They'll simply download a package and go ahead and download. I've actually already downloaded it. They're simply going to double click on that package and then hit continue. Carl mentioned that we're doing work with some hospitals as an example. And I can tell you, we have doctors at these hospitals running these tests. So from the perspective of needing to have a full red teamer to conduct some of this testing, it's just not something that's required. We simplify it. Once this is complete, we simply need to go ahead and hit and upload a file. The way that this works is the user will actually upload the file back here for an analysis. And then here's where we can actually get a report that they can see. The beauty of this is we're not just having you get the data and have that context so you can use it against the vendor, but you're using this as the basis to give them their own measurement as well. In this case, it looks like 9 out of the 11 attacks that EDR should have mitigated were prevented. However, there were some gaps here, right? Credentials and registry was simply not prevented in this case. So we're not just doing this for you to be able to highlight and showcase what's wrong with them. Of course, we want to know this, but we're also going to give them the tools to improve. So the other thing that you can measure here is it's great that they fail. Good to know that, but how quickly and how responsive they're going to be to ensure that they're addressing a gap that was found as part of this process. And we give them those tools here through MITRE mitigations and mitigations that we recommend here directly at AttackIQ so that they can make their environment better as part of the process. That's essentially the fundamentals of what your vendor is going to have to do is just double click that package that I showed you, upload the results. And what you'll get out of that is the context that we saw here. But then even for an individual vendor, you'll actually get an understanding of how they function and operate. So for here, we can see across these 4 machines, what the results were at the MITRE tactic level for the results. We can get a breakdown across the entire organization, how well they're doing. From here, we can see what packages they've ran and which ones they haven't. If, for example, they were supposed to run all the DORA packages, well, it's great, you run it on 1 of 4 machines. What about the rest of them? What about the advanced package? And the beauty of this too is we can even set up automatic processes to maybe send an email, hey, third-party vendor, you were supposed to run that DORA package. I haven't seen you run it, right, as an example. And then finally, regardless of what they run, we know that TTP's alignment to the technologies, so we can actually assess their strengths. In this case, EDR and AV seem to be doing pretty well, and their weaknesses. Content filtering is simply not working at all, what it looks like from this organization. And then we give each organization an operational grade. So as you define the baseline testing that we should be doing, we're comparing apples to apples across the organization. And this is how you can start to get and understand what are the higher risk vendors that you're working with, force those to do more continuous testing. With those that are having, getting an A and a good score, we can know maybe once a year is good enough for them. That's essentially what I wanted to cover today, team. More than happy to give you access to this so that you can explore this yourself.
Yeah, so let's talk about this a little bit. So the idea here is for these organizations to self-report. And so we tend to think about things on from two modalities. How good is their cyber hygiene? They say they own and they operate, all these different controls. How effective are they owning and operating that? You definitely want visibility into that. I would argue this is better situational awareness and visibility than a spreadsheet. If they say they have EDR, how well do they own it, operate it? They have next gen firewall. They have, we can test all these different controls from a cyber hygiene perspective, and you can see across all your vendors, to Jose's point here, what their letter grade is in owning and operating controls. That's part one, and that's super important. And by the way, with them doing this with you, they're also making themselves better, which makes your partnership stronger. The second thing is emergent threats. Obviously, a new sys alert comes out, a new piece of malware comes out. That, if they're infected with that malware, that transit of trust into your organization could be severely impacted. So you want to understand when emergent threats come out, how effective are they at mitigating emergent threats? And again, you can simply direct those organizations to download this package, emergent threat, malware, whatever. Jose's picking Turla as an example. And they just double click on that, run it, and now you can see how effective they are against defending against malware that could adversely impact your organization. So this is super lightweight, it's super easy. It doesn't require someone on their side who is a red teamer to run it. It's click, click, done. Now, where is this being used today? So one of AttackIQ's biggest customers is an organization called Cyber Resilience. It's one of the hottest cyber insurance companies on the market out there today. They require all of their customers with a security policy to run this Flex product on a monthly cadence, both looking at it from a cyber hygiene perspective and a cyber emergent threat perspective. And obviously, their primary objective is to help their customers that have cyber policies with them and make sure that their security is at the highest readiness and resilience available. And so you're going to start seeing, we already have multiple cyber insurance companies that are using this today. And what I would argue is, if it's good enough for a cyber insurance company to use, for risk calculation and quantification, this would be a great opportunity to incorporate something like this that's lightweight into your third-party risk as well. So that kind of concludes our presentation for today. The Flex product is free and available off our website. So if you're interested in checking that out, if you go to the front of our website at the top, you can register for Flex. And there's a bunch of free content in there that you can try to kind of see how easy this is and see if this might be something that's good for your organization. So with that said, I think that's all we have. Jose, anything else from you?
That's it for me. I think a lot of the pushback will be I just want to repeat it. There's no way these vendors will allow us to do that. I think you'll be surprised, especially especially when you have some findings, how much they're willing to actually do and provide you context. So don't be shy. Definitely ask the question, and to Carl's point, make sure it's contractually obligated so that we get this context, because otherwise we're putting ourselves in a bad position.
By the way, I think it's also here to note that some things have to change going forward. Otherwise, we're just going to keep having the same problems we've always had. And cybersecurity, particularly transitive trust, it's a partnership. You're entering into a partnership, and words matter, just like they do in that contract. Cybersecurity posture, resilience, readiness matters, just like we do in that contract. And if you look at this as a third-party risk partnership program, where you're going to make each other's cybersecurity better than it was where you were individually, then I think there's a real opportunity to raise the entire playing field of cyber defensive operations as we work together to make each other better versus working against each other. So just a nuanced view of this for your consideration. All right, well, everyone, thank you very much for your time today. Again, we'll make this recording available and the PowerPoint as well. Thank you.